He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Sweetheart, the service entrance is around back. The caterers use it." The room went quiet enough that I could hear the ice shifting in someone's champagne glass. 47 people in that ballroom, and not one of them said a word. Not even my sister. Especially not my sister. Let me back up, because you need to understand exactly what kind of man Daniel Mercer is before you understand why what happened next changed everything. Daniel Mercer married my older sister Claire 6 years ago at a vineyard in Napa that cost more than my parents' house. I stood at the altar in a bridesmaid dress the color of a bruise, Claire's choice, not mine, and I smiled the whole time because that's what you do. You show up for family. You smile. You keep the peace. I was 22 then, fresh out of West Point, about to ship out for my first assignment at Fort Bragg. I was wearing the dress, but underneath it, every muscle in my body had been rebuilt from the ground up over 4 years of the hardest training I'd ever experienced in my life. Daniel gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner. He talked about Claire's brilliance, her Stanford MBA, her career at his investment firm. Then he looked at me, the little sister, the soldier, and said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "And Maya. Still figuring it out, aren't you, sweetheart?" Claire laughed. Everyone laughed. I swallowed it. I had been swallowing things around Daniel Mercer for 6 years. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. Claire called me on a Tuesday evening, which was already unusual. Claire and I talk on Sundays. Tuesdays mean something happened. "Daniel is hosting a private dinner at the Ashford Club," she said. "Some of his partners, a few board members. It would mean a lot to him if you came." I was sitting on the edge of my bunk at Fort Lewis, still in my uniform, 12 hours into a 14-hour day. I had a planning meeting at 0500 the next morning. My unit had just returned from a 6-week joint exercise in the Pacific that I cannot discuss in detail, and my body still hadn't fully adjusted back to Pacific Standard Time. "Claire," I said, "I'm pretty beat up right now." "It's just dinner, Maya. 2 hours, please." He's been under so much pressure lately, and it would really help to have family there. There it was. Family. The word Claire knew would always work on me because she knew who I was underneath the uniform. She knew I would drive 4 hours through a rainstorm to sit in a room full of people who looked through me, if she asked me to. "What's the dress code?" I asked. She paused just a half second too long. "Formal." I didn't own a lot of formal clothes. I showed up 3 Saturdays later in a simple black dress I'd bought at a department store on base. Low heels, my hair down. No jewelry, except the small gold ring my grandfather gave me before he passed, the one he wore in Korea. I looked presentable, clean, like a person who had spent the morning reviewing tactical logistics for a classified training rotation and then changed clothes in a gas station bathroom off the highway because she didn't want to be late. The Ashford Club was the kind of place that made you feel your own heartbeat the moment you walked through the door. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of men on horses, staff in white gloves. The air smelled like old money and restraint. A man at the door checked a list. He did not find my name on it immediately. "Maya Reeves," I said. He looked up at me slowly, then back at the list. "Miss Reeves, you're seated at table 9. Table 9 was near the kitchen. I found Claire in the foyer, talking to a woman in a red gown. Claire saw me, and her smile flickered just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to clock it before she crossed the room and kissed my cheek. "You look nice," she said. "Where's Daniel?" "He's with the Hargrove people. Just don't interrupt them, okay? I'll bring you over in a little while." I stood near the bar and ordered water and watched the room. 20 years of military training will do something to the way you observe a space. You stop seeing a party. You see sight lines, exits, threat vectors, power clusters. I watched Daniel Mercer work the room, and I mapped exactly who he needed to impress and who he was willing to discard to do it. He noticed me about 40 minutes in. I watched him notice me. Watched him say something to the man beside him, a heavy-set man in a charcoal suit whose last name I later learned was Hargrove, and then he walked toward me with a smile that was somehow both warm and completely cold. "Maya." He said my name the way you'd say the name of a piece of furniture that had been moved to the wrong room. "I didn't realize Claire had actually convinced you to come." "She's persuasive," I said. "You drove up from Fort Lewis?" "I did." "That's," he tilted his head slightly, "dedicated." He said the word like it meant something smaller than it was. Hargrove had followed him over. Daniel didn't introduce me. Instead, he said, over his shoulder, as if I weren't standing right there, This is Claire's younger sister. She's in the Army. Hargrove looked at me with the particular blankness of a man who has decided, in under 2 seconds, that you have nothing he needs. The Army? He repeated. What do you do? Administration? Logistics? Before I could answer, Daniel said, something like that. Something like that. I am a captain in the United States Army. I have commanded a Special Forces support element. I have operated in 4 countries you will never see on a news segment connected to my name. I have made decisions under pressure that people in that room could not have survived being adjacent to, let alone responsible for. Something like that. I smiled. I said, something like that. Hargrove nodded once and turned back to Daniel. I ceased to exist. The dinner itself was lavish, in the way that only deeply insecure money can produce. 7 courses. Wine for each one, poured by a sommelier who moved around the table like a priest. I was seated between a woman who wanted to talk exclusively about a renovation she was doing in her Scottsdale vacation home and an empty chair where someone had apparently canceled last minute. Daniel sat at the head of the table, which was not technically his table to sit at since this was a private club and not his house, but no one corrected him. He held court. He told stories. He was magnificent at it, I'll give him that. He had the particular gift of making everyone at the table feel that they were the most interesting person in the room, right up until the moment he needed them to feel small. The moment came at the cheese course. He had been talking about a veterans charity gala he was co-sponsoring. He described it with enormous generosity, the way men do, when they want credit for caring about something they've spent no actual time thinking about. It's the least we can do, he said, looking directly at me with that smile. For the people who serve. Especially the ones who, well, he paused, let the table lean in just slightly, who don't quite reach the positions of distinction, the ones who end up in the support roles, the ones who need the safety net when they come home. The table murmured warmly. I set down my fork. Not dramatically, quietly, the way you set something down when you want your hands free. Daniel, I said, my voice was even. It has been even in far louder rooms than this one. What do you think I do in the Army? He blinked. The table shifted slightly, the way rooms do when the temperature changes without warning. I think he smiled again, the recovery smile, serve your country, Maya, which is wonderful, truly. What branch? What role? He waved a hand. I leave the military details to the military people. I'm a captain, I said. I command a Special Forces support element. Before my current rotation, I completed the Army's Special Operations Officer course at Fort Bragg. I have deployed 4 times. The work I do is classified at a level that means I cannot describe it in this room, but I can tell you that the people I work with are among the most highly trained human beings on the planet, and they have trusted me with their lives, and I have not failed them. The silence was the kind that has weight. Daniel's smile was still on his face, but it had stopped moving. It was just sitting there now, disconnected from everything happening behind his eyes. Hargrove was looking at me differently, and then Daniel did the thing that sealed everything that came after. He laughed. It was a light laugh, a dismissive laugh, the social laugh of a man who has decided the best way out of a corner is to reframe the corner as a joke. Well, he said, to the table more than to me, we'll have to take your word for it. Claire, 2 seats down, looked at her wine glass. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I did not say another word for the rest of the meal. After dessert, while the table was breaking into smaller conversations, Daniel stood and suggested the group move to the club's private gallery for a demonstration. He'd apparently arranged something special, a presentation from a former Olympic competitive shooter who was now a consultant for one of his firm's portfolio companies. A new line of precision, sports shooting equipment. The gallery was long and narrow, lined with display cases of antique firearms and trophies from past club competitions. At the far end was a shooting lane, blocked from view by a dark curtain. The Olympic shooter was a man named Garrett Tall, silver-haired, very precise in the way he moved and spoke. He pulled back the curtain to reveal a single shooting station with 2 rifles on the bench. One was a bolt-action precision rifle. The other was a tactical platform I recognized immediately because I have trained on its military variant so many times that I can identify it in the dark by its weight. Garrett gave a short presentation on the technology. Everyone applauded politely. Then Daniel said, in that voice, he had the performing voice, the voice for rooms, who wants to try? He looked at Hargrove first. Hargrove demurred. A few others waved it off. And then Daniel looked at me. and the smile came back, the meanest version of it. Maya, he said, you should try. Wouldn't want all that army training to go to waste? He said it the way you offer something to someone you're certain will embarrass themselves with it. He said it to give me rope. I stood up. Garrett walked me to the station. He was a professional. He started to explain the rifle's operating system in the measured, careful way you explain equipment to someone who might be unfamiliar. I let him get through the first 2 sentences. Then, I picked up the rifle, the tactical platform, not the bolt action, conducted a functions check in the sequence. I have run so many thousands of times that my hands do it without my brain's participation. Seated the magazine, verified the chamber, adjusted the stock to my cheek, and settled in. The range was 25 yards. There was a target paper that Garrett had set up for demonstration. I exhaled once. I shot 5 rounds. The room was so quiet that the shots sounded enormous, even suppressed. Garrett walked the target back electronically. He looked at it. He looked at me. He looked at it again. All 5 rounds were touching each other in the center ring, not near the center, in the center, a cluster you could cover with a quarter. Nobody said anything. I conducted the clearance sequence, safed the weapon, set it down on the bench in the exact orientation Garrett had it, and stood back up. Daniel was very still. Hargrove was looking at Daniel with an expression I recognized from briefing rooms. It was the expression of a man recalculating. It was Garrett who spoke first. He was a professional, so he said what was simply true. Ma'am, he said quietly, that's competition-grade accuracy. I appreciate it, I said. I turned around and faced the room. I wasn't performing. My face was the same as it always is when I've done something I've done 10,000 times before. Completely level, completely calm. Daniel opened his mouth. He closed it again. I walked back to my seat, picked up the small clutch bag Claire had helped me select because she said it was more appropriate for the venue than my usual canvas bag, and I said to the room at large, "Thank you for a lovely dinner." To Claire I said, quietly, so only she could hear it, "Call me Sunday. I'll pick up." And I walked out. I drove back to Fort Lewis with the windows down. It was cold, but I needed the air. I had a 0500 meeting in the morning. I had a planning cycle to run, a training rotation to coordinate, people who depended on the decisions I made to actually be good decisions. I thought about them. I thought about the 3 years in this current assignment and the deployment before it and the one before that. I thought about the night in a country I cannot name where I made a call that saved 4 lives and cost me 2 weeks of sleep, and I would make the same call again without hesitation. I thought about Daniel Mercer's face when all 5 rounds came back touching. I'm not going to tell you I felt righteous. I don't know what I felt, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that had been sitting in my chest for 6 years and had finally found the door. Claire called me on Sunday, like I asked. She talked for a long time before she got to it, and then she said, "Daniel didn't know, Maya. I should have told him more. I should have told everyone more. And I'm sorry." I held the phone, and I listened to my sister's voice. And I thought about the girl who stood next to me at every starting line we ever shared, and who has been making the wrong choice, over and over, when it comes to the man she married. "I know you're sorry, Claire," I said. "He asked me about your record after you left. I showed him what's publicly available. He was very quiet." "I imagine." Hargrove called him on Monday. Apparently, she stopped. Apparently Hargrove has a son in the Army. His son is in a unit that falls under the command structure you're part of. Hargrove knew exactly who you were the minute he heard your name at breakfast on Sunday morning. He'd apparently been trying to figure out all dinner how to tell Daniel that the woman he'd been condescending to was... She stopped again. "Was you." What did Hargrove say? He withdrew from the deal, the partnership. 3 years of work, Maya. Gone. He said he doesn't do business with men who don't know the room they're standing in. I looked out the window of my quarters at the gray Washington sky. "I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry about that," I said. "I know," Claire said. "I'm not asking you to be." We were quiet for a moment, the comfortable quiet of 2 sisters who have known each other their entire lives and have run completely out of things to pretend. "He wants to apologize," she said finally. "To you. He asked me to ask you." I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it, which I think is the thing I most want you to understand. I'm not a person who carries things for sport. The weight of what I carry in this job is more than enough. I don't need the extra tonnage of a grudge against a man who was never worth the energy. "He can write me a letter," I said. "Mail it to the base. If it's sincere, I'll write back." "That's it?" "That's it," she exhaled. "You know, Sometimes I forget. What? How steady you are. You've always been like that. Even when we were kids. Even when everything was falling apart, you were just steady. I thought about West Point at 0400 in January, standing in a foot of snow during land navigation in the dark. I thought about the first time I was in a real situation, the first time the training became the thing that kept people alive. I thought about every moment I had chosen to stay level, when every nerve in my body was screaming. I practiced, I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the first real one I'd heard from her in a long time. I have a rotation coming up. I can't tell you where it is. I can't tell you what we'll be doing when we get there, or how long we'll be gone, or what the parameters of the mission are. I can tell you that the people going with me are exceptional, and that I trust them completely, and that the work matters even when no one outside a very small circle knows it's being done. Before I leave, I'm going to have dinner with my parents. My mom will make the chicken she always makes. My dad will ask me questions I can't answer, and will understand when I don't answer them, because he's always understood that, even before I went into the Army, because understanding things that can't be explained is just something our family does. Claire will probably call the night before I ship out. She always does, even when she pretends we're not as close as we are. She will say, "Be safe," and I will say, "I always am," which is not quite true, and we will both know it. But some things you say because they're what love sounds like out loud. And somewhere in a very expensive office in a city I don't need to name, Daniel Mercer is still sitting across from the absence where a 3-year partnership used to be, which is in the economy of men who measure everything by what a thing is worth, the only language he was ever going to understand anyway. I didn't need him to know my rank. I didn't need him to know my record, or my deployments, or what I've done, in places that will never appear on any map he owns. I didn't set out to prove anything to anyone in that room. But I will tell you this, because it's the thing I actually believe, down in the bedrock of who I am. The day I stopped needing people like Daniel Mercer to see me clearly was the day I became someone he was never going to be able to diminish. That shot grouping on the target didn't do anything to him that the truth wasn't already doing slowly, quietly, in every room he walked into. I just let it breathe.